A very good afternoon to everyone. My name is David Korani. I'm the director of the Atlantic Council's Energy Diplomacy Initiative. I am largely to blame for the agenda of this conference today and tomorrow. I have the great privilege to moderate this panel on the globalization of gas markets and geopolitical consequences. I think we had a terrific day so far. Very rich conversations. I think gas was mentioned already many times in those conversations, but this panel is going to drill down deep into those natural gas-related issues. I believe, and I think the minister, the UAE minister this morning already made a reference to that gas is probably the fossil fuel with the brightest future. If you look into the next couple of decades, from an environmental perspective, but also from a business perspective, which is quite paradoxical if you think about it, because for the better part of the 20th century, gas was mainly the unwanted and difficult to exploit byproduct of the oil industry. It's quite a remarkable turnaround, and particularly if you look at the changes in the past decade, they are nothing short of revolutionary when it comes to the importance of gas, the usage of gas, and its meteoric rise in the overall energy mix, not only in the US, but in other parts of the world as well. And then in terms of how gas is produced, traded, and priced, I think the changes are, again, very remarkable. If 10 years ago, someone would have told you that gas would outcompete coal in the US, or if someone told you that the US is going to export natural gas to Kuwait and Dubai, or if Russia would move aggressively into spot pricing and changing all its contracts, then you would probably have called that person completely crazy. So I think we have a lot to discuss in this panel, but before I turn to the panel, and before I turn to the distinguished panelists, I have the special honor to ask the minister from Algeria to deliver a special keynote address. So if I may ask His Excellency Noureddin Boutarfa, who is the Minister of Energy of the People's Democratic Republic of Algeria, to come to the podium to deliver his keynote address. Thank you, Mr. Minister.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank Her Excellencies Minister Al-Marz Al-Marzoughi and Mr. Kemp, President of the Atlantic Council, for the invitation to this forum. I am pleased to intervene as a keynote speaker in this session on the globalization of the gas markets and its geopolitical consequence. First of all, I would like to express my condolences on the tragic death of Emirati diplomats killed in Afghanistan who were carrying out humanitarian work there. This is, for me, an opportunity to listen to your views and get to know perception of this evolution, but also an occasion to inform you of the gas sector development in my country, with its potentialities and prospects in the light of the international context and the ongoing global changes. Before addressing the issues of globalization of the gas markets, it seems to me useful to review some of the main trends in this industry over the last decade. What do we observe? First, gas is taking advantage of a structural dynamic. It is in a good position within the global energy mix. Indeed, proven recoverable reserves have increased substantially, nearly 20%, and thus, despite the significant growth in production during this decade, leading to an overall ratio of reserve to production of 53 years in 2015. Marketed production has increased at a significant rate of nearly 2% barrier to exceed 3,055 billion cubic meter in 2015. Ever thought has somehow slowed over the last few years due to a modest economic growth, but also as a result of stronger competition from other sources of energy that are encouraged by public policies. The Middle East has experienced the strongest growth, followed by the United States, then Asia, Oceania region, included China, in contrast to Europe, where production has declined. World consumption represented 21% of the overall energy consumption, driven by demand in the United States, but also in China and the Middle East, while Europe saw a net decline during this period. Demand remains, as you know, dominated by the electricity sector and the need of industry. Even if new uses than transportation are developing, they are still marginal on a global scale. International gas trade, pipelines, and LNG has increased steadily to exceed 1,000 billion cubic meters in 2015, far above the modest growth pace of demand in recent years. The trade volume represents about 30% of total marketed production, of which a third was LNG. On this issue, one should note the remarkable development of infrastructure of international gas trade, particularly in the liquefied form, which experienced the highest growth and implied an increasing number of liquefaction and regasification units. More than for their industries, technology has been a key factor both in production systems, as illustrated by the development of unconventional resources, as well as in transformation and expansions of trade with the floating units of LNG. Let's observe also that international gas trade flows reflect the impact of the regional development in production and consumption, which has led to a shift towards the most dynamic centers of growth in Asia, particularly in China and India. In parallel, we finally observe a still relative convergence of the three regional markets: Asia, Europe, and America, with clearly narrow price differentials. During last year, gas markets were characterized by an abundant supply and production capacity of LNG expected to grow strongly over the medium term, contrasted by a modest growth in demand. This should accentuate competition, particularly in Europe, where spot markets are developing with gas contracts of shorter duration increasing. What do we learn? Despite its structural dynamics, the perspective remains uncertain. Recent projections pointed to a profound transformation of the market with the introduction of shale gas and the entry of the United States as a large LNG exporter. Announced additional volumes are used given the liquefaction plants under construction across the Atlantic, with some 65 million tons per year by the end of the 2018. Yet, demand is not materialized given the economic difficulties all over the world. Instability becomes a major issue for an industry as capital intensive as the gas industry. An industry that is moreover put in trouble by the low prices and as a corollary by the dark prospects for investment. There is also competition from other forms of energy that remains fierce, like coal, unconventional hydrocarbon, and renewable, but also the questioning of the traditional modes of transaction based on long-term contracts and the development of spot and short-term market coupled with a new pricing based on these markets. Prices lower than those of long-term contract. All the uncertainties arising therefrom are accentuated by the geopolitical upheavals that we know. Ladies and gentlemen, the stakes for Algeria are not different. Historically, Algeria has been a pioneer in the trade of liquefied natural gas with the first delivery of Algeria LNG to the United Kingdom in 1964. With the expansion of the use of the gas, Algeria has developed its resources, production capacity, and export infrastructure to some 90 billion cubic meters per year by pipeline to Europe and in LNG form. Marketed production of natural gas has been maintained during the past decade around 85 billion cubic meters per year. However, with a revival in 2016, this development took place in favor of a steady growth in domestic consumption, reaching 40 billion cubic meters in 2015, and despite a declining demand in Europe, our main market. It is to be underlined that with the technological developments that led to the commercial exploitation of shale gas, Algeria undertook an assessment of an unconventional gas resources which confirms reserves among the largest in the world on the order of 20,000 billion cubic meters. Currently, we are working in the fine-tune our knowledge of this resource from the technical and economical aspects as well as the various impacts of their exploitation. Our own assessment studies confirm those of other specialized agencies to rank Algeria in the third place on the world scale in terms of non-conventional gas resource. The two pilot drilling projects carried in the southeast of the country showed very promising results regarding the prospects for production and thus corroborate our estimates. The country enjoys a vast mining hydrocarbon domain still underexplored with an important potential of conventional and non-conventional resources. Thus, the medium-term plan of the National Oil Company includes an investment of some 75 billion US dollars, of which a large share, almost 80%, is dedicated to the upstream in order to expand the reserves base and ensure the long-term energy security of the country, with an optimal exploitation of the currently production deposits. Our objectives are to meet the growing internal demand and to remain a major player on the international energy markets, in particular gas markets, and thus contributing to the security of supply for our consumers. Their objective will be pursued through the development of all resources of the country, including the unconventional oil and gas resource and the renewable energy, thus ensuring the diversification of the national energy mix. There remains the need for us to find new means to attract investment in exploration and exploitation of new gas sources if we want to maintain our export to Europe in the long run. Just we must acquire new market share around the world to deliver our gas, notably in liquefied form. LNG is indeed an important transforming factor in gas markets, since it contributes to the globalize this market and to make them more flexible. Ladies and gentlemen, the move toward the globalization of the natural gas market will reinforce the security of supply of the importing country and reduce risk from a dependence on a limited number of suppliers. This development offers also an opportunity for the exporting countries because this reduction of the risk should contribute to the expansion of gas consumption and markets. This is an additional factor promoting interdependence and stability worldwide. However, this session is dedicated to the globalization of the gas markets and its geopolitical consequence. I will make some comments as a premise to the discussion. First, even if several developments indicate that we are heading towards a globalization of gas market, the latter will remain to the foreseeable future basically segmented into three major traditional regional markets with, however, more flexibility. It is obvious that the increasing number of the producer exporters and that of liquefaction and reception regasification infrastructure gives it a more global character, although it is still in its infancy and remains quite different from that of other hydrocarbons. In spite of the uncertainty that I have mentioned, this move toward globalization with multiple consequences at geopolitical level seems to me overall to offer more opportunities than raising concerns for the producing country, the industry, and the consumer countries. Among these opportunities, there are the advantages of the new markets for producers, since they are more flexible. Contracts allow to divert LNG for the most rewarding markets and new sources on the route of supply for importers. These prospects should mitigate, if not eliminate, the tension of rigid commercial links and allow the development of more serene and trustful trade relations, contributing to the development of the gas industry, but also to stability and overall, if I may say, to peace. However, this move towards globalization must not be to the detriment of producer countries and the long-term investment opportunities. The issue of a fair price is of paramount importance if we are to ensure the sustainability of this industry. The development of the industry and the reinforced gas market will also contribute to the preservation of the environment, less air pollution, and to the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. The latter will be further strengthened by the role of gas as support factor for promotion of renewable energies through hybrid infrastructures to address their intermittent nature. There are other challenges and real constraints facing the gas industry. I am referring to gas prices, but also to the security of investment. Once again, one of the potential challenges of this globalization and commodization of the gas market with its gas hubs, spot sales, and short-term contracts is to secure the development of important resources, including those that require large investment and thus the guarantees of market outlets, met in the past through long-term contracts. As a pioneer in this industry, Algeria will contribute towards such solution by remaining a reliable supplier for its current and future consumer, while working to expand its resource base. In so doing, it will support the move towards and enhancing energy security for all and contribute to the improvement of the global geopolitical climate. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope that this introduction will contribute to fruitful discussion, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Minister, for this wonderfully comprehensive presentation, which I think serves as a great scene setter for this conversation. You touched upon issues within Algeria on the global gas markets. Let me dwell upon one of your points that you made about the difficulty to keep up the continuously rising domestic demand. And let me turn to Majid Jafar, who is the CEO of Crescent Petroleum and also the board managing director of Dana Gas, major producers of gas and great experience in the region. In this region, which also struggles with the same issue. So it is a region with 40% of global gas reserves, yet many of the countries in the region struggle with gas shortages. So how do you explain that, and what can we do to remedy those gas shortages?
Thank you. So first of all, I believe a lot in natural gas and what we heard about it being a key fuel, and not just even as a transition fuel, but it's kind of the reserve fuel even for renewables, because most of the new renewables are intermittent in their supply, and you end up needing a gas-fired generation as a backup. But what you see worldwide, and I'll come to the Middle East, but there's a lot of strange things going on because of policy in the name of being better for climate change. If you really care about climate change and carbon emissions, we should be focusing on switching from coal to gas. That's what the US did, that's what the UK did. They now have about a third gas in the mix, and that's how the US has the lowest emissions in a generation, since the early 90s, and the lowest per capita since the 60s, I think. And that's because of the shale gas revolution displacing coal. But many countries elsewhere, because of policy, like in Europe, for example, Germany, there's kind of a policy decision against fossil fuels, including gas. So much money spent on renewables trying to bypass gas, and they end up importing coal now from the US to generate power, and they have high energy costs and rising carbon emissions for the last 2 years. So by trying to be more clean, by pushing, almost leapfrogging against the economics, they ended up causing the opposite effect. I'm not saying there's no role for renewables, but we've spent about $2 trillion in the last 10 years on renewables, and a lot of it's subsidies in many countries, and we're still 2.8% of global energy supplies. And if you look at countries like China and India, as we heard, this is where the growth is coming from, there's still almost 2/3 coal and 6% gas. So if you really care about the emissions and the environment, yes, we need to be investing in new technologies and renewables, but don't ignore the current issue and the easiest win in terms of lowering emissions. And that's really coal to gas, plus efficiencies. Efficiencies for cars and efficiencies for home building. I mean, today, all the hype is about electric vehicles. An electric vehicle in the US today results in more carbon emissions because the power that's fueling the electricity has a big chunk of coal in it. Whereas a petrol car, a new petrol car with the emission standards today in the US actually ends up with lower carbon emissions. But people are following, the headlines, not the trend lines, as President Clinton says. You should look at what's the underlying sort of figures. For the Middle East, you're right, we have 40% of the proven gas reserves, probably more. That's really underexplored. Most of that 40% is associated gas that was discovered looking for oil, because as you said, it was an unwanted flared byproduct until relatively recently. And yet we only have 1/6 of gas production. We have 1/3 of oil production, so we're below our potential there, but we're really below our gas production. As you said, there are shortages in many countries. And again, it's an issue of the incentives and policy. Most of the national oil companies have been focused on oil, some exception being Sonatrach and QP, but most of the countries with a lot of oil have been focused on oil. Many of the countries have low gas pricing that doesn't give the incentive to invest in gas. It's much more capital intensive, longer return horizons, more surface infrastructure required. And you can't really do that unless you tackle the underlying energy subsidies. If the electricity is going very, very cheap, you cannot have an upstream price of gas that is competitive. So there are reforms that are required in terms of tackling subsidies and allowing an investment regulatory mechanism which allows more private sector investment in the gas space. And I think that would help unlock the potential of the region and also enable more cross-border trades. I mean, you have situations where countries in the region are importing LNG from the US or from the other side of the world, but not from their neighbor across the border because of some political issues. Here in the UAE, there has been real innovation, the Dolphin project as the kind of flagship project in terms of cross-border gas trade and import from Qatar. We tried to import gas from Iran. The Iranians never delivered, but that was the other kind of obvious regional resource. And then diversification across the energy spectrum while exporting gas still from Abu Dhabi, the LNG. And now there's importing of LNG going on at multiple Emirates in the UAE. So there is this real kind of innovation and entrepreneurship to diversify and be fully engaged in the gas space while tackling the underlying subsidies and encouraging more investment.
Thank you, Majid. This was not the pre-agreed order, but because the Dolphin project was mentioned, I may jump right to Musaba Al-Kabi, who is the CEO of Mubadala Petroleum and the managing partner in the Dolphin project. And Majid talked about the lack of intra-regional trade in terms of gas, and that's exactly what the Dolphin project aims to remedy. So if you could just update us on where that project stands, that'd be great.
Well, thank you. Dolphin project it was a groundbreaking project in the region. At that time, it required certain requirement in order to make it happening. So one primary requirement was a fission at that time. Not many people believed that there is an anticipated shortage or deficit of gas going forward. So fission was very important in order to bring that project to the way it is operating now. Also, political blessing, and that's an extremely difficult in this part of the world. So we had a blessing from 3 countries, Qatar, UAE, and Oman, to go ahead and execute that project. But also it was purely based on a commercial arrangement. So the supplier at that time set a certain price, and the customers in this part of the region were willing to pay that price. So it is a combination of parameters that need to be aligned in order to bring a big project like Dolphin into operation. Also, very important, I would like to highlight, is that you need to have a technical and financially capable partners to execute that project. There is, of course, a possibility or an option to expand in the project. And if you think, I echo Majid's remarks, that there are a wider scope for cross-border gas projects, but it would require, I would say, a different geopolitical environment. But technically speaking, it can be done, it can be expanded, and the Dolphin project was a remarkable success to all parties.
I think another key or interesting example from that perspective is the emerging gas relationship between northern Iraq and Turkey, which is also something that was unfathomable 10 years ago, but now it's being shaped up, and that's one of the fascinating prospects. And Majid mentioned Iran, and then Iran-Saudi gas relationship, although again, unfathomable today, but would make perfect commercial sense. But let me now turn to Anatol Feygin, who is the Executive Vice President and Chief Commercial Officer of Cheniere Energy. Your company last year in 2016 broke revolutionary new grounds, and I had the pleasure to attend the Sabine Pass opening ceremony back in April in 2016. For the first time, you exported LNG from the lower 48 from the United States, which is nothing short of revolutionary when it comes to the global gas markets. According to the IEA, the United States could become the 3rd biggest natural gas exporter by the end of this decade, which is again, given that in 2005-06, still people predicted that the US is going to become one of the largest importer of natural gas, is just a wholesale change. So how do you see the gas markets shaping up? How do you see your impact and other LNG suppliers coming online in Europe and also in Asia in terms of pricing, in terms of gas supplies, in terms of competition?
Thank you, David, and thank you to my fellow panelists for setting up this discussion. I just want to build on themes of technology, innovation, kind of commitment, and being ahead of the curve. We, as David said, we're coming up on the one-year anniversary of the first of our trains becoming operational. First exports were in February 24th of 2016, and that was built on a vision and a pivot that happened really late last decade, early this decade, on the back of a period where there was another revolutionary pivot done by the United States in the previous decade. It was in early 2000s, there was 1 BCF a day of import capacity into the U.S. via LNG available, and through the decade, as the view became more and more prevalent that North America was going to be short gas, that number grew to over 20 BCF of capacity. Virtually none of it was utilized. It was at its peak 15% utilized. So on the back of technology, innovation, the right pricing signals being sent, North America started to become much more innovative, and of course we're now the beneficiaries of the unconventional revolution that really started to hit stride late last decade, and already started to impact that, along with changes in the global LNG market, really started to affect the global gas trade long before that cargo left the Sabine Pass facility in February of 2016. We continue to see that innovation continuing, the innovation that allowed the U.S. power sector to shift dramatically away from coal, reduce carbon emissions from 2.5 plus billion tons in 2006, 2007 to 20% lower than that today, as the economy actually became more energy intensive and grew by about 50% in terms of headline GDP. So quite a remarkable achievement in terms of CO2 reductions, all again on the back of this ingenuity and technological innovation. We see that continuing. We see a very robust resource continuing to be developed, and as we sit here today, the well-publicized estimates that there's 800 plus trillion cubic feet of resource available with economics that are attractive at $3, and a number that's 50% higher than that, just modestly higher. We're very confident that 2-3 years from now, that number for economic break-even and the resource number will continue. The economic break-even will be reduced, and the resource will be increased as that technological push continues. And as you said, we've got right around 65 MTPA of capacity under construction today in the U.S., and we think that number will grow as long as we're right about that resource base continuing to be attractive and a stable kind of low single-digit price as measured by the Henry Hub. So we think that North America, US and Canada primarily, are dealt a very good hand in terms of resource. We at Cheniere will continue to grow the debottlenecking function of allowing the rest of the world to access that resource base. And we think we will be very competitive in the global scheme, again, on the back of that resource and on the back of our ability to competitively bring online liquefaction projects to date on time and on budget in Cheniere's portfolio at least. So we feel pretty good about the U.S. position, and we hope that we continue to have the opportunity to serve the global gas market with this attractively priced resource and the efficiencies that it affords along the value chain.
Thank you, Anatol. So we focused on the supply side so far. I want to focus a little bit more on the demand side going forward and turn to Mohammed Ali Khan, who is the Chief Commercial and Marketing Officer of GE Oil and Gas in this region. Mohammed, if you could talk a bit about gas demand from the end user perspective, from GE's perspective. You are a major industrial conglomerate. You're actually becoming a digital industrial, or in the process of becoming a digital industrial company. So if you could talk a bit about how do you see gas demand from GE's perspective, regionally and then globally. And then maybe as a follow-up question, I might ask you about the role of digitization across the value chain and how that impacts gas usage.
Okay. Well, thank you for inviting me to this, I guess, esteemed panel. When you think about the region here, and we specifically think about LNG and floating regasification, during 2005 to 2014, LNG trade increased significantly across, and I think across 4 countries it increased around about 6%. And historically, those countries have been outside this region. When you think of it now, this region actually equates to that increment across Jordan, Egypt, and places like Pakistan. Morocco in itself as well is establishing 2 1,200 megawatt combined cycle gas power plants. And they're moving away from the typical oil-fired plants to gasification plants. The technology that we sort of develop and we continue to develop in terms of what's within our portfolio of GE, small-scale LNG is a very integral part of what we build. And that's something that, when you think of remote locations in a lot of these countries across the region, that we build and house fully completed, integrated solutions and offerings that are used and transported on modules to different remote locations. So, the movement in terms of from unconventional gases as such, it's becoming a lot more available. And I think, the integrated offerings that we have is really beneficial. We go from, when I think about the entire value chain, we go from extraction to transportation and to regasification. And we have product offerings that fulfill the requirements across the whole value chain of that. When I think of, some of the countries that we've really developed those in and we've supported projects, if I think of one country per se is Turkey. Turkey is really becoming an integral part of, east to west. And they have recently announced, the Turk Stream agreement between Russia, which is a gas pipeline, and we'll, something that we'd be engaged in terms of discussions. We last year won a project to supply aeroderivative gas turbines for the TANAP pipeline, which was, the South Corridor pipeline, which will be transported through Turkey into Europe. And then there's other pipelines that we are heavily involved in discussions with regards to the Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India, which is the TAPI pipeline. So, these are all projects that we're heavily in discussions with. But when you think of our product offerings, one of the areas in terms of that really is a beneficial aspect for our customers is the rapid startup of our gas turbines. And that's something that really has developed. Our facilities, whether it's in Florence or whether it's in the US, have really continued to develop those products. And we've got a lot closer to our customers to really understand the requirements from their side. We can't ignore the dynamics also when you think of financing. Financing forms a big part in regards to how do we work closer with these governments in terms of being able to bring associated financing for specific projects. And we work very closely with our export credit agency companies, where we'll have, products that are either being manufactured in France or in Italy, where they front financing and provide export credit for those projects, which really helps these countries to be able to really, encourage these countries to really ensure that they can execute on these projects.
Thank you. Let me now turn to Anne-Sophie Corbeau, who is a research fellow at CAPSARC in Saudi Arabia. She has a wealth of experience in gas markets, working with the IEA and IHS Sarah before. You worked on the gas market reports at the IEA, so you know everything there is to know about international gas markets. I want to stick to the demand side of the equation and ask you about how do you see demand shaping up in the next 10, 15 years? And in my mind, that's one of the biggest uncertainties. The IEA in 2011, I believe you were still there, heralded the golden age of gas, which we are not there yet, but we might be there. There are, of course, many uncertainties in terms of the long-term usage of gas from a climate perspective, because it's cleaner, but it's still a fossil fuel. And in terms of a long-term full decarbonization agenda, you have to think about either gas with CCS or no gas at all beyond 2050. And there are enormous uncertainties in both Europe in terms of how the gas markets and gas demand will shape up. Function of economic growth, function of fixing the ETS system, etc. But also in Asia, how Chinese demand will look like, whether India is going to be able to diversify away from coal and move more aggressively into gas. So how do you see that picture?
Well, I think I will drag this golden age of gas report until the rest of my life, because it has been 6 years and everybody who is seeing me is still reminding me about the golden age of gas. I think the only country which has really achieved the golden age of gas has been the United States. I mean, it has actually exceeded our expectations in terms of demand and production. For the rest, unfortunately, it's not so golden. And actually, this is exactly what I was going to talk about, because what is keeping me awake at night right now is that whenever we are talking with agencies, with companies about their long-term projections in terms of natural gas demand, everybody sees a golden future for natural gas, and the last IEA projections again are reinforcing this image. Everything is going well. When I'm looking at the past few years, I do not see any reason to be that optimistic, and I think I find 3 reasons for that. The first one is that natural gas is still considered as a fossil fuel, and therefore it's still emitting CO2 emissions, and it's not always considered by governments in their long-term policies as a solution. It might be accepted as a bridge, but never as a long-term solution. Another thing which is coming up on top of the CO2 emission is methane emission, which I have been hearing more and more talked about over the past few years, in particular in the United States. Well, the problem with methane emissions is that there's not that much data, and I think there is a lot of work to be done by the gas industry in order to basically quantify that problem and also address that problem. Because otherwise, the green people and some government officials are going to say, why on earth should we choose gas? It's actually worse than coal. So no, thank you very much. So definitely that's a problem. And the third issue is that, well, we have been enjoying very high gas prices, notably in Asia, and this has attracted all these LNG investments that we are seeing coming to the markets today. But the problem is that these high gas prices mean that natural gas is actually very expensive and not competitive. And in my opinion, in order for natural gas to succeed and to secure its golden future, or the golden age of gas, you have to have a product which is competitive and affordable. And that's very, very important. So indeed, I mean, in the US, we have had natural gas beating coal, and the main reason was that natural gas has become very cheap. I think if you remember 2012, certainly we had gas-fired generation going through the roof. Yeah, gas prices were at 2. Obviously, you are beating coal when it's like that. But if you are looking now at Asia, for example, despite lower gas prices that we have seen for most of 2016, not quite now, well, gas was still not competitive against coal. And that's a problem, and this is exactly what Mr. Pouyanné said this morning. I mean, you need to have a carbon price in order to make natural gas more competitive, or you need to address the coal-fired generation. How did the UK manage to increase its usage of gas recently? That's very simple. They have, on top of the ETS, a carbon tax, and they have closed down coal-fired plants. So if you want gas to succeed, you need to close down these coal-fired plants. Otherwise, they're always to come back through the back door. Believe me, they are competitive. And it's very, very worrying in Asia. Look at Japan, look at Korea, these great countries. Hey, look at their long-term forecast. Coal is inside. Look at all the investments in power generation in the Philippines, in Vietnam, in Indonesia, in Malaysia. Malaysia, a gas exporting country, is building coal. Coal is coming in Asia. Where is the golden age of gas there? Gas has to be competitive and affordable. 6 weeks ago, I was in India. Very interesting country, India. And when you talk to the Minister of Power, he's telling you, yeah, well, I'm not against gas, but you know what? I have about 600 million people who do not have access to electricity. So you give me cheap gas? Yeah, sure. We can have natural gas in the power mix. But if gas is more expensive, or really more expensive than coal, why on earth should I have gas? Should I impose gas in my power mix? Give me a good reason. I need affordable electricity for the people who do not have access to electricity right now. So this is the things that keeping me awake at night. But, there are some glimmer of hopes. If we manage that, we really need to make natural gas affordable. That's the first thing. And forget about, the very expensive LNG projects that we have seen. And I'm talking about things like Gorgon in particular, which became outrageously expensive. We are no longer in the $100 per barrel of oil, and we need to forget for the moment about the $15 per MMBTU of natural gas, because this is not something that customers are ready to accept. Even in Japan, Japan, no. They want to delink natural gas from oil right now. They want to have affordable energy. I think there is hope also in the transport sector. The IMO decision, International Maritime Organization decision on sulfur is actually a bright spot if you want to switch from oil products to LNG in the maritime transport sector. And I'm sure some people here are looking at me horrified, like, oil decreasing in the maritime transport? No, bad idea. Well, I think in terms of sulfur, that would be quite important, and also in terms of overall pollution, that would be a good thing. And we do have about 1.3 billion people who do not have access to electricity. So I fully agree, renewable has a role to play. But if you are looking at roughly the 600 million people who do not have access to electricity in Africa, well, I think there is a role to play for natural gas. So I'm sure people from IRENA and the other people are looking at me like, oh, no. We don't want Africa to turn to gas. Well, they do have natural gas resources. Look at Mozambique, look at Tanzania, look at the discoveries in Mauritania, in Senegal, in Ghana. These people have natural gas. They should be developing natural gas resources for their domestic market, and maybe also consider LNG export. But for that, we have a crucial problem, which is financing. Another big thing which worries me right now is the post-2020 period, because we have had about 2 years of low oil and gas prices. Investments have been going down, very few investments in LNG exports. What's going to happen post-2020? And the last thing we want is suddenly to have, demand picking up, because there are a lot of people who suddenly are very interested in LNG or in natural gas. They're thinking, hey, it's cheap. So you have a lot of customers, and I'm sure my friend from Cheniere is going to agree with me. We have a lot of countries which are suddenly appearing on the LNG radar screen that we had never seen before. Certainly Malta, Gibraltar, Ghana, South Africa, Morocco, Côte d'Ivoire. All these countries are seriously considering importing LNG. They were not really considered before. Yes, but if all these countries are coming and consuming more and more LNG, and then suddenly post-2020 there has been no investment because prices were too low, because there was a lack of investment due to the economic conditions, we are going to have a huge market squeeze. And that's not something that the public opinion wants, but definitely not something that the politicians want. And this is, I think, a huge danger for natural gas, because renewable is coming big time, and the big ideal association of natural gas and renewable is something that the gas industry should not count too much on. I mean, maybe it's okay for the next 10 years, but think about the evolution of batteries. I mean, in 10 years from now, maybe, you know, the renewable industry is going to tell you, you know what, I mean, gas-fired plants, we don't really need them. I mean, we have all the flexibility we need on the demand side. So, sorry, guys, not interested. So beware the renewable industry. I think we should not consider them as friends.
So it's very similar to the oil markets, the underinvestment, and then from the glut, we could quickly find ourselves in a very different situation, maybe with a little delay, maybe it will not be a line, but the LNG situation will come later.
LNG, you need 5 years, roughly.
Yeah. We are running out of time, unfortunately. I wanted to pivot back just for 1 second to the supply side, and Majid mentioned Iran, which is either, depending on which statistics you look at, either the first or the second when it comes to global gas reserves. And has huge potential, is already a major producer, and has very ambitious plans going forward in producing twice the amount of gas or even more than it does in the next 5-6 years, doubling the production capacity. But at the same time, there are many challenges. So my 3 questions, and to Majid, but anybody else from the panel who wants to respond, is how do you see Iran's gas production potential going forward? How expensive or affordable that gas is going to be? Are they going to produce enough so that it does not only satisfy the growing domestic demand, but also will be available for export? And then finally, what will be the export destinations if Iranian gas indeed will be exported?
So Iran, you know, has, as you said, huge reserves, and not only a big share of the North Field, the Qatar North Field, South Pars, but fields all across the Gulf and flaring and so on. It's one of the biggest flarers, I think first or second. The problem is, again, policy and politicization. There's a national oil company which has exclusive investment rights since the 1979 Constitution, and they haven't had a good track record for investors or even contractual partners. So they signed 2 gas contracts to export gas, Turkey and with us for the UAE. Both went to arbitration. The Turkish won twice. Their import contract, because ironically, they're actually still a net importer. They import more from Turkmenistan than they export to Turkey. That's going to arbitration now. So, and again, it's politicization. And I think it takes us back to the key message I'm hearing from the whole panel and from the whole session, and really from the whole forum, which is beware the politicization, the political policy making, whether it's based on geopolitics in the region here, as Musabbah said, or whether it's based on fashion in Europe. You know, let's do renewables because it looks good, and actually you find your carbon emissions are going up because you've, you know, taken some strange decisions. I mean, yes, coal is more competitive, absolutely, especially, you know, above $5-6, depending on where you are. But subsidizing renewables is far less competitive, but they're doing it anyway. So there's a cheaper way to achieve those targets. And I think we need to all look at the US, the amazing result of the US shale revolution, and again look at what we can learn other parts of the world. I don't think anyone can replicate the free market they have in the US, the infrastructure, the capital markets, the fact that everybody owns the petroleum under their own real estate, the traded natural gas market and Henry Hub and so on. But we can learn that when you unleash the private sector and you rely on market forces and the right regulatory regime, you can achieve what governments never thought possible. I mean, the Obama administration came in speaking the same language as Angela Merkel and all the Europeans, but the market had other ideas. And then when the results became clear, the administration was very happy to try and take credit for it, but I had nothing to do with it. They were going in completely the opposite direction with their policy. And it's not even recent. If you go back, you know, the Carter administration passed legislation to ban the use of natural gas for new power and industry because they thought in the 70s that the US was running out of natural gas. And then they ended up pushing to coal, and a lot of the rest of the world followed them. So beware, you know, because as we've heard, there are long horizons for investment. And you can't be making those decisions based on short-term political considerations. You need to be really taking decisions that are commercially as well as environmentally viable to be sustainable.
Thank you, Majid. We have about 7 or 8 minutes left. Let me now turn to the audience and see whether there are questions out there. We have a roving mic, I think, in the middle. I see David Goldwyn there. I'm pretty sure he has a question or a comment.
Thank you, David. David Goldwyn, Atlantic Council. I guess my question is about the new customers and demand. And Sophie, you said a lot of the problem is that gas is too expensive. Do you think a lot of this is a credit problem, that you have a lot of new customers who don't have the credit? And how are, and I guess my question for Anatol and others is, how are the contract structures changing and the terms changing? Is LNG becoming more affordable to a new class of customers because they don't have to have a 20-year take-or-pay contract? And does that and small-scale LNG provide some optimism for demand for LNG?
Yeah, I think there is a big problem regarding indeed the credit, because all the countries, or a lot of new countries which are looking at LNG right now are very small countries with relatively poor credit rating. So you have either no gas market at all or very small gas market. You don't have credit-worthy customers like power generators, etc., who could take the gas. You need to do the investment in infrastructure. I mean, we are talking about very small and teeny markets which actually may not be of immediate interest for the suppliers. And this is something that we are observing across the board right now, is that the customers these days, the LNG buyers, they don't tend to take huge volumes of natural gas. If you look at the last G2GNL report of 2016, the volumes imported or contracted were usually below 1 MTPA. So if you are trying to contract your traditional 5 MTPA train, you need 4 or 5 customers, which, you know, implies a lot of negotiation. So I think there is a role for the multinational institutions, financial institutions there to support natural gas. But again, this is a question about what is the role of natural gas in the long-term energy mix. And because there is a lot of support for renewable, when you are looking at, you know, the sustainable energy for all, and you try to do a search for gas or natural gas, you cannot find natural gas in all the documents, or very rarely. So natural gas is very often not considered as a solution, which I find a pity, because if these countries, can use as much renewable as they can, but if gas can actually add something else, either in terms of power generation, but also potentially as industry, because these countries also need economic development. So by developing the industrial sector, you can also bring more economic growth to these countries. That's all the problems that I see for these new countries. It's not easy, it's not going to be tackled immediately, but I think there is a role for the gas industry, maybe to invest along the chain, and there are companies like Total who are doing that, for example, in Côte d'Ivoire, where they are investing downstreams. But there is also the role of the international financial institutions there.
Anatol?
Thank you. Thanks, David, for your question, and thanks, Anne-Sophie, for setting up part of this answer and contribution. But one of the things that the U.S. model and Cheniere's model brings to the table is a lower upfront commitment to an LNG solution, in that the resource, the upstream resource, is not integrated with liquefaction. So the fixed fee component, if you will, and the take-or-pay piece is greatly reduced, because you don't have to pay upfront for developing the resource. You can source that at a very large and liquid North American market. We at Cheniere are, amongst some of our esteemed competitors, evaluating smaller technologies, modular, mid-scale and small-scale technologies, and we're pretty optimistic that will allow the minimum efficiency scale, as Anne-Sophie referenced, to go from something in the 4 to 6 MTPA range to something in the 1 to 2 MTPA range. It's been discussed many times on many panels, but in the gas world, it's not that different. The OECD is not your big demand driver. It is overwhelmingly the electrification of the emerging markets that is going to drive incremental demand. And for that, we need to scale solutions to service these emerging loads and their power requirements. And credit is a concern, and we see an increasing role for the ECAs to play, as well as other strategic alliances. We often talk about examples of emerging LNG demand that 2 years ago seemed at least very aggressive, like a Pakistan, where now it seems pretty clear that it'll have at least 3 FSRUs online and great ambitions beyond that. But it is a credit that is more challenging than some of your traditional term, 3 to 5 MTPA load-serving OECD utility-type buyers. So there are challenges, but there are solutions. It all hinges on having an attractive value proposition. And Sophie's point about all of these integrated resource plans that you see across the world being very coal-based goes back to her other point that it is a price signal. And over the last 5 years, the price signal was that LNG was a very expensive, double-digit, an MMBTU type commodity. Now that the price signal is that it is mid to high single digits, those plans are being recalibrated, and we're seeing a lot more structural demand for gas being dialed in. So if we are right about our assumption that the North American upstream market continues to supply an attractively priced BTU, we are highly confident as Cheniere that we'll be able to deliver very competitive liquefaction projects. Those two together should provide an attractive value proposition, and the responsiveness of both the North American upstream market with the productivity of the unconventional resource and the time to market of incremental expansion trains should be a very attractive proposition for enabling the growth of the global gas market.
Thank you, Ansel. Mohammed?
Yeah, I guess, when you look at it from a customer's perspective, efficiency is a big gain, right? Driving improved efficiencies in the existing portfolio. And as we've sort of embarked on this digital industrial journey, there's something that we've developed in terms of software applications, asset performance management tools, and something we refer to as the Predix platform. It's a cloud-based platform, similar to like an iOS platform within the Apple world, where we develop applications specifically designed for our customers to drive, improved efficiencies, optimized offerings within their existing assets to ensure that they're maximizing on the potential of those assets. And I'll give you an example. In RasGas, in Qatargas, in Qatar, we've developed modules with them and applications with them that have really seen an increase in efficiency of around approximately 20% in their existing assets. And that's something as we continue to develop those products, we're partnering with our customers to do that. And that's allowing us and allowing them to, rather than having a big capital expenditure outlay or investing in new projects, it's really allowing them to make sure that they, maximize on their existing portfolio. And we're doing it across the board. It's something that really we've developed and we continue to develop and work with them on this.
Musaba, as our host, you have the last word.
Yeah, on the demand side, what we see in the region, consistent, for example, with what the minister mentioned this morning, the UAE Strategy 2050, part of it, or a significant part of it, is efficiency. So it contemplates almost 40% efficiency introduction in the system going forward. But on the demand side, we see customers more reluctant to commit for a long-term contracts. That was the common practice, I would say, 10 years back. But because of the uncertainties associated with the demand and the energy mix going forward, we see more customers shying away from long term and focusing on a short term. Also in the LNG space, we see more LNG spot trading, like what we haven't seen before, and that trend we expect will grow going forward.
Wonderful. I won't even try to summarize the discussion, or maybe in just one sentence. Gas may have a bright future, but that road is going to be rocky. I think it was a very, very rich conversation. We're going to have to run now, unfortunately. We're going to have to wrap up the first day. I think it was a great start to this forum. We will continue tomorrow morning at 7:45 with the panels. It's a little early, but I think it will be a really, really good conversation on the outcome of the US elections and associated risks. So I strongly encourage you to be there despite the early time. Tonight, though, we have something fun prepared for you. We will all leave here in 10 minutes at 6:30. The buses will start loading. Will actually load, so not start loading, so please be downstairs at 6:30, going to the Yas Marina circuit, which is the Formula One racetrack here in Abu Dhabi. And we have a number of electric vehicles available on the racetrack that you will be able to try, not necessarily the fastest ones, or not all of them at least. And we have limited availability, so we can't promise that everybody is going to be able to drive. But those of you who want to drive, please bring your driving licenses, valid driving licenses, and don't drink and drive. So see you downstairs at 6:30. And let's give a big round of applause for the panel.